Welcome, everybody. We begin this morning with music. Again, most people are in the live stream, so this will be a little bit different sounding than perhaps we've done in the past. But our opening hymn is number 207 in the Grey Hymnal. The words will be on the screen. Earth was given as a garden.
Hi, I'm Andie Larson. I'm your worship associate today. Behind the mic. Sorry. Hi, I'm Andie Larson. I'm your worship associate today, here for the Chalice Lighting. As we light this chalice today, let us remember the interdependence of existence on this earth, each of us relying on one another and our earth for sustenance, nourishment, and community. Let us use the resources available to us wisely, renewing one another in community as we seek to renew our planet and her resources.
So welcome to the Unitarian Church of Lincoln this Sunday morning, or to our live stream on Sunday morning, or to watching our live stream on Thursday night, or to some archival purpose 50 years from now. My name is the Reverend Oscar Sinclair. I'm joined in our chancel this morning by our worship associate, Andie Larson. Over the past several years, the way that we have met has often changed here at this church. Whether in person, on Zoom, on a YouTube live stream or some way that we cannot yet imagine, worship together is a chance to deepen our connection to the sources of meaning in our lives, to proclaim what we are about and who we are, throwing open the doors of this congregation and proclaiming the radical love and welcome that is at the heart of this shared faith. We say that the Unitarian Church of Lincoln aspires to be a loving community, uniting reason with spiritual exploration to transform ourselves and the world. So welcome to this loving community. May we, in our gathering here, be about the work of transformation. We'll continue on with music. It is a pleasure to welcome Chris Sayer back. I'm always guest preaching whenever Chris comes, and so it is a special joy that we have overlapped.
The pleasure is all mine. When I was asked to write this song about 20 years ago for a volunteer event, I really struggled with coming up with something, but the basic theme is kindness. And the theme today, of course, even though this song is more about people, kindness to our planet is going to be a verse I'm going to add to this someday. So it's called Making a Difference. Time can be so precious, we seldom have enough. We spend our busy lives trying to keep up. Have you ever wondered where you might be today if someone hadn't helped you once or twice along the way? You can make a difference, it's easy if you try. To share the gift of kindness is as good a reason why. Are you ready to discover what so many know as true? That you can make a difference in most everything you do. It doesn't matter who you are, where it is you live. There's always something in your life that you can find to give. It could be time or money or a friendly helping hand. But any way you look at it, you're sure to understand. You can make a difference, it's easy if you try. To share the gift of kindness is a perfect reason why. Are you ready to discover what so many know as true? That you can make a difference in most everything you do. We're young and old together, we're rich and poor alike. We're coming from the city or past the old turnpike. We're working for a living or we're struggling to survive. But all the same we're grateful just to be alive. You can make a difference, it's easy if you try. To share the gift of kindness is as good a reason why. Are you ready to discover what so many know as true? That you can make a difference in most everything you do. You can make a difference, it's easy if you try. To share the gift of kindness is a perfect reason why. Are you ready to discover what so many know as true? That you can make a difference in most everything you do.
Our story today is called The Boy Who Grew a Forest. In India, on a river island, among farms and families hard at work, there lived a boy who loved trees. Trees meant shade, food, and shelter for many. But each rainy season, floodwaters swallowed more and more of the beautiful tree-covered land. The boy's precious island was shrinking, eroding away with the rushing river, leaving empty sandbars behind. The boy witnessed animals stranded on those sandbars, their homes destroyed. He feared that if animals withered without trees, people would too. The boy shared his fears with the village. The elders explained that the only way to help animals was to create new homes for them. They gifted the boy with 20 bamboo saplings. Alone, he canoed down the muddy river. He wished he could cover all the land with trees, but a large sandbar nearby was a place to start. The land was too barren for animals, the shores too sandy for leafy trees. Would bamboo grow? The boy hoped. Determined, he began to plant. 1 shaft, then 2, then 3. And every day he watered the saplings by hand, sweat trickling down his face and chest. He built a watering system to help and lugged heavy buckets from the river. His arms grew tired, his back sore. Still, each day he tended to the plants. And over time, the bamboo patch grew into a healthy thicket. The boy was proud of his work, but he worried it wouldn't be enough to stop the swelling river or to provide shelter for enough animals. If he wanted more plants to grow, he would have to create a richer soil. The boy carried cow dung, earthworms, termites, and angry red ants that bit him on the journey to their new home. He brought seeds from neighboring villages, over trails, through brush, down the river, and each day he planted. As years passed and the boy grew, so did a forest. 10 acres, 20 acres, then 40. Wildlife returned for the first time in many years. Buffalo, one-horned rhinos and snakes, gibbons, migratory birds, and elephants. The man's forest teemed with life and diversity. Not everyone was happy. Fear swept over the villages when tigers arrived. So the man planted more grasses to attract small animals that would keep the tigers happy in the forest. Elephants wandered into neighboring farms to feast on the crops. So the man planted more fruiting trees to help feed the hungry elephants. Some wanted to harvest the forest to build homes, but the man was there to plan anew. Others tried to hunt the animals for their horns and fur, but the man was there to protect. Few thought the forest would last, but the man believed in its strength. And now, in India, on a large river island, among wildlife and trees as tall as buildings, there lives a man who has planted a forest. And the forest is called Malai, after a man named Jadev Malai Payeng. He never stopped planting and pruning and protecting. He is known for saying, "Only by growing plants, the earth will survive." And that is the end of our story.
A central part of our services every week is the time that we join together as a community to mark the moments in our lives. We share with one another our joys, our sorrows, the events that mark the steps on our journey. The threads of sorrow and those of joy are intertwined in our lives, present for all, remembered by all. We share those threads, and then they are woven together with the others in our community, Our joys are shared and magnified. We are comforted in our sorrows. Before we move into sharing this morning, just to try something different. Take a moment and really ground yourself in whatever time, whatever space you are in. Put your feet firmly on the ground. Find a comfortable place with your back. Close your eyes, or if not close them, just let them focus in the middle distance. Take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Whether you are experiencing this alone or with another person on a couch or here in the sanctuary, we are all joined together in this single moment of mindfulness. And in this shared breath, in this shared moment, I invite you to type into the chat or speak into this shared space your name or the name of another you wish to be remembered in sorrow. I'll repeat the names into the microphone so that we can all hear.
Remembering my brother-in-law, Rick, who brought beautiful music into the world. He died yesterday morning with his 2 cats snuggled up beside him.
Remembering Rick, who brought beautiful music into the world, who died yesterday. In the chat, care for Deirdre, Dana, and Craig. Healing for Kelsey. Continued concern for my brother David. Joy for new beginnings. Ted. Sorrow and grief are not the whole story. Are there any names that you wish to type into the chat or speak into the space that you are remembering in joy? There are 2 more sorrows in the chat, concern for Michelle and victims of the Frick Park Bridge accident. Who are we holding in joy this morning? There we go. From Kay Hoff, joy, new grandson born Thursday. Corbin Silas Hoff. Mazel tov. Well, continuing this moment of presence, I'm going to invite you to sing together number 123 in the Grey Hymnal. It's pretty well known, Spirit of Life, but really pay attention to it this time. This week as I was writing the sermon, I read about Carolyn McDade, who wrote this song in the last hymn that we'll sing. While she doesn't exactly identify as Unitarian Universalist anymore, she brought great joy to her writing for many, many years. And this hymn in particular straddles personal presence, inviting the holy to be with us, and a commitment to making the world better. So if you will, please sing with me number 123 in the Grey Hymnal, Spirit of Life.
maybe it's still in the folder. Yes. Okay. Each week, we take up a collection to support the work of this church and our partners in the community. We do this because, just as we all grow from our participation in the community, we all give back through our time, our talent, and our treasure. To give, you can text UC Lincoln and the amount to 73256. That's UC Lincoln and the amount to 73256. The offering will now be gratefully received. Our reading is from The Utility of Rage by Emma Maris in The Atlantic. Anger can be directed outward in the form of action, but it can still singe the source. People engaged in climate work also need internal strategies for dealing with anger and other intense emotions, what Davenport describes as more sophisticated forms of self-care that can calm our nervous system. They include keeping ourselves physically healthy and well-rested and taking time out with tools such as meditation, exercise, and outdoor activity. For Chanyalpa, who this year is teaching a course on coping with eco-anxiety and climate grief, spending time outdoors in the very ecosystems she is most worried about is also grounding and healing. The source of the greatest suffering is the source of your greatest strength, she said. For Sarah Murr, a paleoclimatologist who trains early career scientists to be climate leaders, making prints on the subject of climate change has proved deeply therapeutic. It allows her a contemplative space to feel her feelings, but also an opportunity to create a physical object that externalizes those feelings. I don't feel like it is sitting inside me anymore, she told me. It feels lighter. Some, including me, may also need therapy or medication to cope with their rage, even if that rage is rational and justified. Davenport has said that climate change, an ever-present crisis, causes ambient anxiety that raises our background levels of tension and worry. But the pandemic is also causing ambient anxiety. For people of color, racism does the same every day. For Indigenous people, colonialism exists as a constant, present-tense stressor as well. Poverty creates an immense burden of ambient anxiety. Many activists are thus working under ambient stress levels that no amount of coping techniques can neutralize. The paradox of working toward a just, truly sustainable society is that you have to do it in an unjust, toxic one that makes both the fight and just living needlessly hard.
Last winter around this time, I was in upstate New York for a couple months. In the midst of the winter surge of COVID over late 2020 and early 2021, my parents and I formed a pod. We had taken our daughter out of school, and so we had 4 adults shifting off 2-hour shifts to care for a toddler, which was sustainable, but barely. We started out with all 4 of us living here in Lincoln, and then in January and February of last year, we moved the whole pod to upstate New York. At the time, we were pre-recording all our services here at the church, and so I could work fully remotely from upstate New York and do the job here in Nebraska. There are any number of stories from that 2-month period that will probably make it into sermons over the next 10 years. But one of my favorite parts about that actually was in preaching. Once or twice I took a camera and I went out and recorded in the woods on the Finger Lakes Trail in January and February in upstate New York. And if you remember those reflections, the Finger Lakes Trail in January has somewhere between 18 and 36 inches of snow on it. Upstate New York gets a lot of snow and it doesn't melt. And so these trails through the woods are quiet. And even at the height of day, the sun is muted. But for all that quiet and all that in-between light, it feels bright and airy. There's a crispness to the air and a light that comes off of the blowing snow that is beautiful. And sometime around this time last year, I realized that fundamentally I am a forest person. Now that's not quite the same thing as being a tree person, because Nebraska has trees, right? In my office at home, I just look out to the right, and there's a big old oak tree in our yard that's right outside my window. But what's less common in this state are forests. Landscapes as defined by trees as Nebraska's are by prairie. I was born in Michigan. I grew up around elm and sycamore forests in the lower peninsula. My family had has a cabin up north in Onekama. My grandparents' generation built it. This stole that I'm wearing was given to me by my great aunt who helped build that cabin in the middle of a grove of elm trees. I grew up playing on those trees, putting swings up into them. And for much of my youth, after we moved to New York, I would go hiking and camping in the Catskill Mountains, another forest near to my heart. In the Catskills, you can tell they're not very tall. They're about 3,500 feet. It's the tallest, which I suppose that is a mountain in Nebraska. But by East Coast standards, that's actually pretty low. But you can tell when you cross about 3,000 feet, the air changes. The forest goes from mostly maple with some oak and some pine to hemlock. And you can smell the sap on the air. Right as you start to get really tired of climbing, all of a sudden the air is crisp and clean. We talk about climate change a lot, but this is actually where it feels most present for me, because the forests that I have loved are dying. There are few healthy hemlocks left in the Catskills. An invasive species has killed most of them over the last 20 years. Dutch elm disease first came to Michigan about the same year I was born. A few years ago, I was up at the family cabin when I heard a crash in the middle of the night and went running out to the front porch. And the elm tree that was right in front of the cabin where I played as a kid had come down and landed in between two cars. And what was once a grove is now a clearing. The light is much different in that cabin the last 5 years. In New York, those snowy winters that I took such joy in capturing on camera last year have a elegiac quality to them because we really don't know how many are left. Now, granted, neither the woody adelgid or Dutch elm disease are direct effects of climate change. But they are related, invasive species brought to this landscape as part of the same cycle of resource gathering and destruction that has changed so many things. There is a quality of loss whenever we have this conversation, when we talk about the planet changing around us. Because it's one thing to mourn the loss of a friendship, the loss of a companion, the loss of a family member. That's part of being human. Preachers and poets have been writing about that for thousands of years. But few of us are equipped to handle the grief of losing a forest, a prairie, a coral reef, a landscape. These places that feel sacred because of their timelessness are suddenly embedded in time with an ending. The Atlantic article that Emma Maris wrote, and that Andie read part of, starts like this. Usually, the story starts with a quick roundup of alarming statistics and a reminder of all the latest climate disasters. Heat domes, floods, hurricanes, etc. I'm going to skip that part. Most of us get it already. We understand with our rational minds that the climate is changing, and we feel that it is changing in the deepest part of our gut, where dread and fury live. A poll conducted by Yale and George Mason University researchers in September found that 70% of Americans are worried about climate change, and 47% describe themselves as angry about it. I'm in both of those groups, Emma Maris writes, and so am I, Oscar. In my 15 years as an environmental journalist, I've always been able to ground myself on a bedrock optimism that humanity will get its act together. Lately, though, as the pandemic has dragged toward its third year, the West has continued to burn, drought has parched my part of the world, and climate action has stalled at the federal level, even with Democrats in control. That has changed. I am burned out. For some people, this might manifest as fatigue or disengagement. For me, it is anger. On a near daily basis, I can feel my blood sizzling in my veins. Living in the era of climate change makes us feel lots of things: guilt for our own part in heating the planet, grief for what we have lost and will lose, fear about the future, and anger at selfish decisions made by the powerful people who got us to this moment. How do those who think about climate change every day keep getting up every morning? I spoke with them for this story. I'm sorry. Taking care of their mind and body is a priority for all the people I spoke with for this story, but so was something else, using their anger. There's always either a slow burn of anger and like a raging fire, sadness, or vice versa. Mary Hagler, an essayist and co-host of the podcast Hot Take, told me, "When I'm deep in despair, I'm doing all the self-care, but when I'm deep in anger, that's when it's time to get active." Any realistic conversation about climate change in 2022 is on some level a conversation about managing grief. Grief that takes many forms: sadness, disconnection, grim humor, rage. That's table stakes at this point. I don't know how anyone can grasp the sheer magnitude of what has already been lost and what might be lost in the next generation, and not grapple with some sense of despair. And when we do that, we are posing a fundamentally religious question. In times of loss, when the magnitude of what we are responding to dwarfs our experience as individuals or community, how do we respond in healthy ways? "My heart is moved by all I cannot save," the poet Adrian Rich writes. "So much has been destroyed. I must cast my lot with those who, age after age, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world." Adrian Rich did not write that in response to climate change, but it does fit this moment. A few weeks ago, a member of this congregation's Green Sanctuary Committee lent me a copy of The Future We Choose, the Stubborn Optimist's Guide to the Climate Crisis. This was probably optimistic that I would get that book read before this sermon, but I did. It's by Christiana Figueres and Tom Rivet-Karnak, two of the architects of the Paris Climate Accords. They begin that book with the reality of loss and how to respond to it. To protect what we love from danger, they write, is a natural human instinct that when we feel a lack of agency can easily transform into anger. Anger that sinks into despair is powerless to make change. Anger that evolves into conviction is unstoppable. This is the Adrian Rich turn. Our hearts are moved by all we cannot save, and because we cannot save everything, we can either fall into despair or cast our lot with each other. This business of being human, this business of being people of faith, is to find meaning even in moments of despair, to find ways of taking that anger and turning it into conviction. So what might we do as a people of faith? One of the first things a religious community does, regardless of the topic, is manage and acknowledge grief. Right? We do this every single week when we gather together. When we are present together in this time and say our sorrows are easier to bear when they are shared. It's what we do when we do memorial services at this church. We aren't bringing anybody back from the dead. We aren't preaching eternal life. But we are sharing the experience of love and loss that is so much a part of being human. So first, this can be a place to acknowledge the grief that has come with a changing climate. I am saddened by the loss of the landscapes of my youth. I imagined that I would share climbing on elm trees with Ailish at that cabin, the cool smell of hemlock sap on Slide Mountain. We're conditioned by society and plenty of advertising, the Super Bowl's in 2 weeks, to move past negative emotions quickly, right? To say, I'm sad, but if I just have X, then I won't be sad anymore. Then I won't mourn anymore. I'm angry, but maybe I should just sign up for a yoga class or a meditation program. So it turns out half of pastoral care in churches is just repeating it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be angry. You don't need to move past that. That is part of being human. The question is, how do you take that anger and turn it into conviction, not into numbness? Back to Figueres and Rivet Carnac in the Stubborn Optimist's Guide. People feel real grief over the unspeakable loss of ecosystems and biodiversity, and over how much more we are going to lose, including the future of human life as we know it. Those who are enveloped in this grief may have lost all faith in our collective capacity to challenge the course of human history. Grief can be a powerful, transformative experience for some, and arguably a major reason climate change has continued largely unchecked for so long is that we have failed to truly feel what it will mean. It is important that we allow ourselves adequate time and space to deeply feel our grief and openly express it. As we tune into the raw emotion, many of us will undergo a dark, unsettled period of despair, but we cannot allow that to erode our capacity to courageously mobilize for transformation. This is back to me. We must cast our lot together and reconstitute the world. And they have some ideas of how to do that. It's Stubborn Optimist's Guide. Much of the book is contained in describing 10 actions to take as stubborn optimists in the climate crisis. And many of these are big picture ideas that we talk about regularly in churches, attached to climate change and unattached to climate change, right? Face your grief, defend the truth, be a citizen, not a consumer, engage in politics, invest in a clean economy. But nestled in all of those is one very, very simple directive. Plant trees. Plant trees. In addressing climate change, few actions are as critical, as urgent, or as simple as planting trees, they write. This ancient carbon-absorbing technology needs no high technology, is completely safe, and is very cheap. It reverses the process that has led to climate change, in that as trees grow, they absorb CO2 from the air, release oxygen, and return carbon to its rightful location in the soil. In addition, trees provide coveted green areas for cities, reduce ambient temperatures, may produce food, and stabilize aquifers in rural and suburban areas. Unfortunately, they continue, over the past 5 to 10 years, we have come to think of planting trees and reforesting as a penance that we must pay for the sin of emitting greenhouse gases, or worse yet, as a pretended benefit that hides the reality of emissions. Offsetting has developed a bad reputation among some environmentalists, and it is time to correct this mistake. Every single one of us should plant 1 tree, 10 trees, or 20. Don't even think of it as an offset. In itself, it is a critically important contribution to addressing climate change now, without the need for sophisticated energy technologies. Those will be developed, but even when we count on them, we still need to absorb carbon out of the air to reach net zero emissions. So in short, plant trees. And there is further good news about turning anger or despair into conviction, or just wanting something to do with your 4-year-old. You don't have to do this alone. Over the last several months, faith groups around Lincoln have begun a program called Faith to Forests. Members of UCL's Green Sanctuary Committee have been involved in the program from the start. And as of the last board meeting, the Unitarian Church of Lincoln itself is a sponsoring congregation in the program. Faith to Forest includes volunteer programs, educational opportunities, and worship services across the city of Lincoln, all around this single, relatively simple step: plant trees. They've been meeting on Zoom every Thursday night for the last month for educational opportunities. There's also going to be opportunities to meet in city parks to learn about the trees that are in Lincoln, to care for them and learn how to plant more of them. But this Thursday night on Zoom is the next piece of it, when Lincoln City Library's Director Pat Leach and state climatologist Martha Scholsky team up to review and discuss The Future We Choose, the Stubborn Optimist's Guide for the Climate Crisis. For more information about all of those steps, I encourage each of you to reach out to our Green Sanctuary Committee to find out where and how to get involved, and then to do it. To turn whatever you feel in this moment into some level of conviction. Conviction, not just that we should be doing things, but that we actually do things. It is easy to get caught up in despair and anger these days, because so much has been destroyed. That is where Adrian Rich starts. That is where we start. But it is up to us. It is up to people of faith in the world to find and make meaning in it. I think that is fundamental to who we are. We find and make meaning in the world, and then we find concrete ways to express it. Amen. Our closing hymn this morning is another Carolyn McDade piece, Rising Green. I'll say that I mentioned earlier that Carolyn McDade is not exactly Unitarian anymore. One of her observations about us is that we have turned some of her songs from protest songs into songs of comfort. Spirit of Life was not written as a song of comfort. It was written as a song of conviction after a meeting of the peace movement. Rising Green is a beautiful tune, but it is a song about conviction. And when we leave that part out of her legacy, we leave out some of who she was. Anyway, our closing hymn is number 1068 in the teal hymnal, or on the screen above me, Rising Green. One note in closing. Carolyn McDade is known for her activism in two things. The first is interconnection, sustainability. The second is her anti-war activism. I, like many, many people, came to Unitarian Universalism through the anti-war movement. And we treat these things as disconnected from each other sometimes, but there is nothing more damaging to climate than tanks rolling over the steppe in Russia and Ukraine. There is nothing more damaging to our sense of interconnection than war. There is nothing that is so horrific to our capacity to work together as human beings than armed conflict. So if I wasn't preaching about faith to Forrest this week, that would have been the sermon. But they are connected. Thankfully, some messages are better heard in music than in spoken word anyway. So I am just going to hand it over to Chris and get out of the way.
Couldn't have said that any better myself. And I was thinking about current events, and I thought to myself, wouldn't it be amazing if we could funnel all those resources from the military-industrial complex into climate change and the environment? Wow, think what we could do. And this song from 1950 has always been one of my favorites, and a third verse was added by a friend of mine, Neil Cross, who I met last summer at a music camp in Grand Lake, Colorado, and I'm going to include that here. This is a very powerful song for all of us dreamers. Last night I had the strangest dream I ever dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. I dreamed I saw a mighty room filled with people and pens, and the papers they were signing said they'd never fight again. And when the papers were all signed and 1,000,000 copies made, they all joined hands and bowed their heads, and grateful prayers were prayed. And the people in the streets below were dancing round and round, and guns and swords and uniforms were scattered on the ground. Last night I had that dream again, and it didn't seem so strange to think of no more wars on earth, a blood for peace exchange. And it's such a new idea to hold that nations would not fight, and our sons and daughters safe at home, waging peace with might. Last night I had the strangest dream I ever dreamed before. I dream the world had all agreed to put an end to war. That always makes me emotional.
Be well, everybody, and go in peace.